Hello everyone, greetings from Riga Business School. My name is Elza Priede and I am very happy to welcome you here for the third webinar this year. I hope you are all enjoying your spring break, and today Greg will present you a presentation on conquering the world, and someone has said that people who are crazy enough to conquer the world are the ones who actually do it. And I wanted to remind you one fact, that after hearing out this, you fill out a quiz and do it 3 out of 4 questions correctly. So I will welcome Greg and he will introduce himself.
Thank you. All right, good afternoon. Thanks everybody for showing up. It's really an honor to be here, and it's quite exciting because all of you are really starting off on a really interesting journey, which is building a company, which is management of people. Today I want to share with you some ideas about organizational culture and also national cultures. I built this presentation on 2 different ideas, as you can see in this slide. So 2 topics for today. One is the internal culture of the company, and the other is the external culture of the company and of the market, right? And the reason I did this is that I was thinking this through, and I was thinking that for a company to deal well with a foreign culture, the first thing it has to do is to be able to deal with itself. Okay? It's much like a person. Right, a functioning person that does well in a business or in working at a job or just being a productive member of society, first they have to be a mature adult. So I want to talk a little bit about how do you build a mature company, and then we can move into how does that company deal with the external culture of different markets. And so by external culture, really what I mean is the culture that your company is going to be working in, different cultures around the world. All right? So to start with this then, what I want to talk about first of all is what does it mean to have a well-managed company? Okay? When you think about internal culture, that's the basis for a well-managed company, and it really means the way that we share ideas, the way we share knowledge, the way we work together, the common normal things that we do, the accepted ways of working. And there's a quote up there by a guy named Peter Drucker which says, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." Right? Now when you go to business school or you read business books, you hear a lot about strategy. He had ideas that culture was actually more important than strategy, and we'll get to why a little bit later in this presentation. Okay? So to start with, talking about a well-managed company. What is it that management has to do to make sure the company is a functioning company that can work well? And there's really only a few things. Right? And the first thing up there is it says the company has to be effective. Now what does it mean to be effective? Well, if this tool is effective, what does it do? It switches the slides. It has a pointer on it so that I can point things out. It actually does what it was designed to do, right? It fulfills its purpose. Its purpose is to help me do this presentation, and it does that. And so it's effective. Now, what does it mean for a company to fulfill its purpose? What is the purpose of a company? A lot of times what we hear is to make money, to make profits for the owners. Right? And if you study economics, you'll learn that maximizing shareholder value is the purpose of a company. But in economics, you're talking about to build a healthy economy, we need profitable companies. Within one company, though, the purpose has to be more fundamental than that. Your purpose for any company, for any organization is always the same. And it's to provide something that somebody will buy. Right? It's to create some client value, to provide for client needs. That has to be the focus of your company. Everybody knows this when they start a company, but we kind of lose sight of it later on when we start making too much money. Right? So this is the first thing that management has to do. It makes the company functional, that can actually provide something that somebody wants to pay for. This is the first role of management, which is a P role. Right? Now, this isn't quite enough for a successful company. For a well-managed company, we also have to be efficient, meaning that we spend less money than we take in so that we can have some profits. Right? And how do we build efficiency? We organize the company. We make it systematic. We put in place some administration. Right? This is an A role in the company. Right? Now we have a company that sells something somebody needs, and we can do it for less money than they're paying us. So now we can make profit. So when I think about profit, it's not the purpose of the company, it's what happens when you fulfill your purpose efficiently, and you make a profit. Now, is this enough to be a well-managed company? Well, in the short term, it is. And why only in the short term? Right? I've got a telephone here. And let's say I built this telephone. It provides everybody's needs. People are really happy with it. I make a profit with it. How long can I continue to successfully sell this same telephone? Right? Well, in today's market, 6 months, a year maybe. And then what happens? New phones come out with different features, with better things, and people move to those. So what we have going on all the time is change. And that change happens from in the place of competitors, happens in all aspects of the market. Technologies change, client needs change, suppliers change, laws change, everything's changing. Right? And to be able to deal with that means that we also have to change. We have to innovate and come up with new products, new ways of working, and so on. And so to be effective in the long run means we need to be able to satisfy changing client needs. We still have to satisfy those needs, but they're changing. And to do that, we need an entrepreneurial role in the company, right? Which is the E role. We have to be entrepreneurial, meaning we create new products, we create new ways of working, and so on. And the best companies can do this proactively, which means that they actually change before the market changes. They lead change and they create change. Right? And to do that is exactly what you're doing with your new companies. Right? You're seeing an opportunity in the marketplace, someplace where you can create value. You imagine what kind of future you can build with your company, and then you take a risk and start to move there. And that's really what this role is imagining the future and taking a risk and starting to move there. Right? So that's effectiveness in the long run. Where does efficiency come from in the long run? Well, this E role is all about change. And when we try to introduce change into a company, one of the things that happens is that people resist it. They don't like change. And actually, we introduce a change, and some people will say, oh, this is great, let's do this. And others will say, no, wait, we should do this, or we should do that, or we shouldn't change at all. And they start pulling the organization in different directions. And that's not efficient at all. So efficiency is when we can integrate people and move them together in the same direction. And this makes the organization organic, meaning that it can grow and change and adapt as needed. And these 4 roles, PAEI roles, are all that's needed for good management. That's what management needs to do, is make sure the organization's doing these 4 things. And this is done through different departments and people and so on. For instance, in the P role, providing client needs. That's obviously the sales department does that. Also production does that, right? They're short-term focused on just getting things to the clients that they need. Administration happens through accounting. It happens through legal. It happens through IT, that we create systems by which we can manage the company. The E role happens in product development, in marketing, looking at new markets and how do we approach them, how do we position themselves, how are client needs changing. That's the marketing role. And I happens through the work of managers, building a strong team, getting people together. Right? And so when management can do these 4 things and do them in the right amount, they'll have a well-managed organization. Now, the big challenge with this is that all of these are incompatible. They don't work together well. If you look at this model, you'll see you have short run and long run. And you know personally in your own life that when you have short-term priorities and long-term priorities, what happens? You put off the long-term until later and work on short-term priorities. And companies can't afford to do this, but it happens all the time. Those two things are in conflict. Short-term always squeezes out long-term. Then we have effectiveness and efficiency. Right? In fact, to be more effective means to better satisfy client needs. And we do that by customizing our products. But what does that do to our efficiency? It undermines efficiency. So to be more effective, we have to be less efficient. And to be more efficient means being less effective. I'll give you an example. Right? I think there's a lot of people watching today, but if I was to order lunch for everybody, and I wanted to be really effective, I would ask everybody, what is your favorite meal? And I would make that and send it to you, and you could eat it. But what would that do for my efficiency? Right? For me to make a separate meal for everybody is not going to be very efficient. If I want to be efficient, I order one kind of pizza, and you eat it whether you like it or not. Right? So those two things are not really fully compatible. There's always choices that have to be made. And it's a source of a lot of conflict in organizations. And all four of these roles are in conflict. The P role is about what we do. Salespeople are just going out and selling, trying to get customers to buy. The A role is about how it gets done. And the A role says slow down. You can't sell to them because they don't fulfill the credit needs. Right? You have to tell that customer no. So those two roles are always in conflict. The A role and the E role. The A role is about creating systems and processes and doing it the same all the time so we build efficiencies. And the E role is about changing everything all the time. So there's huge conflict there. And all of these roles are in conflict. And the job of leadership is how do we get these four roles to work together in the organization? How do we integrate them? Because people fulfilling these four roles all have different interests. The salesperson's interest is to make customers happy. The guy in production, his interest is to produce at the lowest cost possible. Right? And those two things can really be in conflict. So when the sales guy comes to production and says, I need a special order, production says, wait a minute, no, we can't do that because it undermines my efficiency. It's more expensive. Right? So the job of management is to be able to get these roles to work together, to get people in these different roles to learn from each other and move the organization forward rather than just fight with each other. Okay? Now, the next slide I'm going to show you is the company life cycle. Now, this line, you can also call it a product life cycle, or you can actually call it the line of everything, because everything has a life cycle. Everything is born, grows, ages, and dies. It could be a car, it could be a house, a company, a person, a star. Everything is born, grows, ages, and dies, goes through this life cycle. And at different stages of the life cycle, there are predictable problems. So what we're going to look at is the green side of the life cycle, because really that's where most of you are headed. And so this is a little bit about your future and what you have to look forward to as you build a company. Right? The first stage is one called courtship. And courtship is, it's actually a stage in a relationship between a man and a woman before they get married. They've decided they're going to get married and now they're courting. So that's the stage of courtship. And in a company, in the corporate company life cycle, this is actually the stage before there's even a business. All there is an entrepreneur who's in love with his or her idea. Right? And so what they are, they've got the vision of the future, what they want to create, they're trying to get other people involved and excited, and so on. And most of the time, all that is ideas and nothing ever happens. People just talk about some business that they'd like to start. But if they work really hard, they get other people involved, they take some risk, the company can move into the startup phase. And that's where a lot of you are now. You're in that startup phase, you've got a product, you're trying to sell it, you're trying to build a business, you're trying to build some income. Okay? Very difficult phase to go through, but also very exciting. A lot of challenges. It's a lot of inexperience in trying to get things going and just figuring things out. And it's much the same if we look at the human life cycle. This is much the same as having an infant child. It needs constant attention. And if you don't give it that constant attention, the startup company can die very quickly. Right? And many of them do. But if the team works hard, they build up some income, they start to get regular customers, their cash flow turns positive so that they're making more money than they're spending, they move to the next stage, which is the growth phase. And now they've got satisfied customers. They're maybe getting written up in the media and the press about their company and how the great product they have. And what their goal is now is to get more and more people to buy from them, to build up their customer base, and maybe expand into new markets, and maybe develop new products so that the customers you can have, you can sell them more. Right? And so the company goes through a phase where it's really growing. It's still run by the founders, who are you, probably still making most of the decisions. You probably have a management team. Right? And at some point, though, this company grows to such a size that it outgrows the capabilities of the founder. Or very often the founder stays in managing the company, but after being there for 20 years wants to move out of the company. Right? So at some point there needs to be a transition, because this is a phase of entrepreneurial management, and there needs to be a transition to professional management. This is more like a child company. If we said this is an infant, this is a child who's learned how to walk and goes to school, and at some point they have to transition from being a child to being an adult. Right? And we need to transition our companies from being entrepreneurial companies to being professionally managed companies. And that period of transition is called adolescence. And an adolescent in English, the term adolescent is a teenager. Right? This is the teenage years when there's a transition between being a child and becoming a mature adult. And companies go through this same transition. And really what the transition is from the founder running the company and making all the decisions to a professional management team running the company and making all the decisions. Because then the company has a lot more capacity. Right? If they can make it through this transition, which is very difficult to do, they move into what's called prime. And prime is where we have a professionally managed company that's able to balance flexibility and control so that they can control operations, but they can change at the same time. Right? And that's where companies should be heading towards, right? Getting to prime. Now, when we look at these different stages, once you get to prime, the other side is the aging side of the life cycle. And with people, right, we all age and die eventually. Companies, most of them age and die, but companies don't have to because the people are replaceable. Right? So companies can continue on in prime. They don't have to grow old and die, but many do. Right? Or many just grow old and stay there for a long, long time. Right? And that being an old company means that you're no longer innovating and drawing customers. You use your same old products and just continue to sell them into the market. But you've lost the ability to innovate. And we see this with a lot of companies. Think about somebody like Nokia. Right? Was a leading company in prime for quite a while and quickly moved in to this stage and were bought. Okay? So we want to stay on this green side. This is where, and get to prime and be able to stay there. Okay? Now moving through these stages really is about understanding this PAEI model and the roles of management. Because if you look at, remember I said that good management means filling all four of those roles. But those roles are like vitamins. And at different stages of development, we need different vitamins to be healthy, different mix of vitamins. And companies need the same. They need a different mix of the PAEI vitamins at different stages of the life cycle. And I'll show you how this works, right? So in the first stage, what we have, this is the stage where there's just an idea. A lot of excitement about the future and what we're going to create. And that really is the E role. That's the role of creating value, creating something new. Right? Of course, when you're in this role, in this stage, you still have the P role because you have to do some work. You have the A role because you have to create a business plan. And you have the I role because you got to get people to work with you. Right? But it's primarily the E role. Once you take some risk and start the company, actually, it changes. The focus of the company changes. Because now, once we move into startup phase, you actually have to do a lot of work. Right? We have to start producing results. And that becomes the P role. Right? And you can see the E role has grown smaller. I'll give you an example of how this works. Okay? I recently met a young lady who lives in Estonia and has developed a business that focuses on cosmetics, and she's got a specific cream that she's developed from some natural ingredients. And she told me that she's got one customer, she's working on getting 2 more customers, and as soon as she gets those 2 more customers, she's going to start developing her next product. Right? Developing that next product is the E role. But at the same time, she's still in startup phase. And what she really needs to do is push the product she has. Because if she takes her focus away from that and starts focusing on a new product, she's not focusing on sales. And the companies at this stage can't do both. So what they need to do is take the product they have, push it into the market, penetrate the market as much as they can, stabilize their company, build up their cash flow, and once they get a stable customer base and they can produce and fulfill the needs of that customer base, then they can start looking into developing new products. But she should, for the next year, just spend time building up the customer base as much as she can. That's the P role. Of course, the A role is needed because she has to be able to keep track of expenses and incomes and count her money, and the E role is necessary because you have to be able to be flexible in how you approach customers and so on. In the I role, we still have to work with people. Right? Now, when you move into growth phase, the E role comes back in because now we move into new markets, we develop new products, we get new customers, we get new suppliers, and on and on and on. It's a lot of change, and we have to manage both. And at some point, we grow to the size that we have to make this transition to prime, to professional management, and what's really needed in the company is to build up the A role. Companies in growth phase don't have good systems and processes. It's like a kid who's learned how to walk. And they have a lot of energy, a lot of excitement, a lot of curiosity, and they go out and want to play with everything, but they don't have a lot of self-control. Right? Companies that are in growth phase, a lot of times they don't know which of their products are making money, which products are losing money. They may be selling products, and every time they sell it, they lose money. Right? But they don't know. They just think because I got revenues coming in, I've got a good business. But actually, they don't have a lot of control over it. Right? And so they need to bring in the A role, and that's adolescence. And it's the same as a kid transitioning from being a child through the teenage years. What are we trying to build as parents in our teenagers is some accountability and responsibility, which is the A role. We're trying to prepare them for life on their own so that they can take care of themselves. Right? And that's really the A role, is what we're trying to build up. But kids hate it. Teenagers don't want to take responsibility. They want more freedom, but they don't want to be held accountable for their decisions. Right? And it's the same in companies. They don't like it. And when you go into a company and try to put in job descriptions and reporting and processes, and people say, why do we have to do this? We've never had to do that before, and we've been successful. So it's a really difficult transition to make. But once you can make that transition, you move into what's called prime. And now you can see that everything is big letters except the I. And why isn't the I big? Because prime is a very difficult place to be. It's no different than being a top athlete in the world, right? Top athletes work really hard. They sacrifice a lot, and it's the same in these companies. So that I role is really about people and how satisfied they are, I suppose. How comfortable they are. And if it gets too high, they're too comfortable. So we don't want them too comfortable. They have to continue to produce results and push and push and push. Right? Now, when you look at all of these, the reason I'm showing you this is because what these represents are changes in the organization's culture. Down here, we have a culture that's focused on dreaming and visioning and how are we going to change the world. Here we have a culture that's focused on just go out and do it. And here we have a culture that now is focused on both. And then we bring in a focus on more systems, more administration. And so all along here, these are changes in the culture of the company. And if you understand how your culture needs to change, you can move ahead faster through these curves. And the thing about this is constant change. And this is being able to understand this and manage this is the definition of managing change. When you go to business school, one of the things you have is a course called change management. Right? It's a special course. It's like something different that managers don't normally do. But actually, change management should be a manager's job description. That's all they do every day is deal with change. And you know, starting up companies, for those of you that have started companies, you know that every day what you do is deal with change. Right? All right. So let's company life cycle, something about company culture. I said before we'd get back to this strategy, this quote, culture eats strategy for breakfast. Right? And what does this mean? It means that strategy is only an idea. Strategy is what you're thinking we're going to do. Culture is what we're actually doing. And so if your strategy doesn't fit the culture of the company, it's never going to get executed. Right? So there has to be alignment between those two. All right, let's move on. Now we're going to transition into external culture. And in terms of a company, the external culture is that national culture in which the company is working, in the different markets, right? Where the company is operating. Here's a quote from a guy named Gerd Hofstede. Every person's mental programming is partly unique and partly shared with others. Which means, sure, we're unique individuals, but we also are part of a society. And we subconsciously agree to follow the social norms in that society. Right? So Hofstede created this to help us, as managers, we can use this to help understand how a society works. What are the roles in a society how does a society look at itself and operate? And so he came up with these 6 different attributes of a society. And it has to do with the culture in the society. Right? And so we're going to go quickly through these. Right? So the first one is power distance. And power distance basically means how accepting are the people in a society of the difference between the distribution of power between those at the top and those not at the top. So a country with high power distance expects its leaders to be really strong and decisive and expects them to exercise a lot of power. Okay? That's a country perhaps like Russia. Russia likes strong, decisive leaders. Okay? Countries with low power distance would be one like the United States. In the United States, everybody criticizes the leader. Right? And if you're good at criticizing the leader, you even get your own TV show. Right? So that's power distance. How willing is a society to accept inequality in the distribution of power? Okay? Next one, individualism versus collectivism. So in individual societies, what we see is that the people there basically are concerned about taking care of themselves and their family. In a collective society, it's a little bit different. Members of collective societies are members of groups, and they expect the group to take care of them. And the payment for that is loyalty to the group, right? So Australia is a very individual society. People there mostly are concerned about, making a life for themselves and their families. Japan, on the other hand, is very collective. And in Japan, individuals will do what's good for the group that they're in. For instance, if you work in a company in Japan, you're very loyal to the company. You do what's good for the company. You don't want to stand out as an individual. You don't like being rewarded for individual performance. It's all about group performance. And in exchange for that, some of the cultural things are that you get lifetime employment, you get promoted based on how long you've been in the company, and so on. Okay, so two very different approaches. Okay. We can also look at societies in terms of masculine versus feminine. Masculine societies, like men, are very interested in status and achievement and how many things I have, which is basically quantity of life. So how successful can I be in what I accumulate? Feminine societies, on the other hand, are more focused on building relationships, on having strong family ties, and on building up quality of life. A masculine society, for instance, is the United States, where in the United States, for women to get ahead, they really have to act more like men, right? And also in the United States, what you see is a lot of conspicuous consumption. People buying bigger cars, bigger houses, having to keep up with the neighbors in terms of the toys they own, and so on and so on. Feminine countries would be something like Scandinavian countries, where they're much more focused on the social fabric and taking care of those that are more needy. And okay, so we can look at countries in terms of masculine versus feminine. Right? And then we can look at them in terms of uncertainty avoidance. So this is how comfortable is a society with things that are unknown, and particularly with the future, because nobody really knows what's going to happen in the future for certain. Some societies are really uncomfortable with that, others aren't. Societies, for instance, the UK, probably is pretty low in uncertainty avoidance. They're not so uncomfortable with uncertain events, as you can see with the Brexit vote. Right? They voted for Brexit to leave the European Union without even knowing what's going to happen. Okay? That's a pretty low uncertainty avoidance. Then you have other countries, for instance, some Asian countries. They're uncomfortable with uncertainty, so what they do is they create a lot of laws, a lot of customs to get people to behave in certain ways so that they can kind of predict what's going to happen. Right? Next, we move on to long-term versus short-term orientation. So some societies tend to be focused more on long-term and are more open to change. Some are focused on short-term, and they only use what they know worked in the past, which means they're less open to change. Right? Indulgence versus restraint. So this is, indulgence is really about how you go out into society and express yourself and seek immediate gratification. In some societies this is okay, others are more restrained. Right? Latvians tend to be pretty restrained in terms of going out and celebrating, going out in public and how you express yourself. Other countries, like in Turkey, for instance, right, they can go out and be much more open. Also in the United States. When they go out, they're not afraid of showing themselves and partying and having a good time. Right? So they're higher in indulgence. Okay? So what this does is gives managers or people working in different cultures an opportunity to look at different countries and get an understanding of how you might approach people in that country or what to expect in terms of their behavior. Okay? So this is a tool that you can find in the slides, a link to this tool, that shows you comparisons in these different attributes among countries. So for instance, you can see power distance in both Latvia and the United States is fairly low. So it's okay to criticize those in power. And people that are not in power expect power to be shared more. Both are fairly high in individualism, although the United States is much higher. You can see Latvia, though, is a very feminine society. United States is more masculine. Okay? That comes as a surprise to some Latvians. But you can see it in terms of the strong families in Latvia. In Latvia, who helps raise kids? It's grandparents. In the United States, who helps raise kids? It's the nanny you hire off the street. Right? So that's, and that nanny is actually a symbol of your wealth. Right? So it's more about having something else to show yourself off. Right? So that's more of the masculine side. And then both the United States is pretty high in uncertainty avoidance, you can see there, and so on. And so what this does is you can look at it and understand your own society in these attributes and understand something about yourself, but then when you're going to go work with another country, you can see what to expect from that culture. Right? And you can find this just by going online and using a search tool and searching for Hofstede country comparison, and they'll give you some links to go to that page. So I encourage you to use that anytime you're going to work with people from another country. Right? So that's one tool that's available to help understand another culture and what to expect from that culture. And really what this is about is understanding that a culture is nothing more than a set of rules. And in cultures we have rules for everything. And just a few examples. Time and speed. Some cultures, right? What does it mean in Latvia if somebody says to you, I'll send you back an email soon? And that means soon. That means, maybe within a couple hours, maybe today. What does it mean in Spain? Does it mean the same thing? Right? My experience is that it means maybe tomorrow or the day after tomorrow or something like that. So they have a different definition, right? They have different understandings of time. I was in Hawaii one time, and in Hawaii, I met some people there that worked on the military base from the United States. And, I thought, wow, it must be great to get stationed in Hawaii. Go in the military and you got to move to Hawaii and live there and work in the military. But most of the people in there that had come from mainland United States, they didn't like it at all. And the reason why was because they were on island time, which means nothing ever gets done. Right? They just take their time and take their time. Everything moves so much more slowly. And so it was really frustrating to work there. Okay? So different cultures have different understandings of time and speed. Even within a society, right? You think about speed. Think about how fast people walk. If you're in the country's capital, they walk at a certain speed. If you go out into the countryside, do they walk at the same speed? Usually it's a little more slowly. Okay? So even within a culture, there's different rules. Right? Physical space is another area where we have rules. For instance, how close you can stand to somebody in a conversation. Right? Americans like a big space around them. Right? They don't want anybody standing too close. This is my space, and if you come into my space, I get uncomfortable. When I have conversations with Russian people, they come and they stand right here. Right? And I'll tell you a story. I had a student one time, a nice Russian young lady, and she came up and was talking to me, and she was standing right here. And she would talk to me, and I felt a little uncomfortable, so I moved away, and then she'd move closer, and I moved away, and she moved closer. And eventually I saw another student over here, a young man, and I said, hey, come here. I got to introduce you to this person. I put him between us so that now she was over there and now I could have a conversation with her because she wasn't in my space. Right? So we all have this, in different cultures, we have different definitions of space. Also, if you go to different cultures, that has to do with queuing up in a line. I was in Belarus one time, had to go to the bank. They don't wait in line. There's just a mob that runs up to the tellers there, and whoever gets there first gets waited on. There's no waiting in line. And there I was. I come from the U.S. where everybody lines up pretty well, and I'm like, this is crazy, but it's normal for them. And they think standing in line is strange. And then also, there's rules about symbols. Right? We can have rules about the kind of cars we drive, or the size of desk we have in our office, all of these different things. And I'll give you one example, right? How all of these kind of fit together. About a little over 10 years ago, there was a delegation of businessmen that went with the Latvian government to China. And going to China, they took a translator with them. And this translator was a friend of mine. He's a Chinese-Malaysian guy that went with this delegation to China. And he told me a story about the first night that they got there. The Chinese delegation had a big dinner for the visitors. After the dinner, the Chinese people pulled him aside, pulled the translator aside, and said, I got to tell you, I think the Latvian people are angry at us. And the translator said, well, why? And it had to do with, first of all, how they distributed their business cards. Because the rule in China and other Asian countries is that when you get a business card from somebody, it's like a formal event, right? You hand the business card with two hands and you take it with two hands. And you look at it and you read it and you comment about something on it, right? But the Latvians showed up to dinner and they just took their business cards and were throwing them at them. And the Chinese guys were like, what are you guys doing? And then the way Chinese shake hands, right, especially the older generation, is that they have a really soft handshake. Here, I'll show you. Right? Like that. It's just really, really soft and gentle. It's not the hard handshake we use in the West. And so the Chinese guys said they threw their business cards at us, and then they shook our hands so hard it hurt. And so they thought the Latvians were actually angry with them. But in fact, what had happened was the Latvians had just broken some rules of etiquette. Right? We have these cultural rules about everything. How fast we walk, how fast we eat, how we dress, the type of umbrella you carry. If you go out and see somebody, if it's raining outside and you go out and see somebody carrying a bright yellow umbrella, is that a man or a woman? Most likely it's a woman, because men carry what? They carry dark blue and black umbrellas. Right? It's a norm. Really, I like to call them cultural rules. And we have these rules for everything. Right? And so by better understanding these rules, what we can understand is that if you're in a conversation with somebody from another culture or in some kind of business relationship and you're feeling frustrated, one of the first things to realize is that they're probably just breaking one of your rules. And so really, going to this second point here, being a good cultural communicator means, first of all, better understanding yourself, understanding what your own rules are in your culture, and understanding that when people break those rules, you feel uncomfortable. You can feel frustrated. And you feel like you're not being treated fairly, perhaps. Right? But it's just, we all work from different sets of rules. Right? And then the other final thought up there is that has to do with why I started with internal development, why I started with the internal culture. And that is because really our internal development is a prerequisite for external development. Right? For us to be contributing members of society, first we have to be mature individuals. Right? And so for your company to become a really strong contributing member of economy, it needs to be a mature company. And that's building an internal culture that supports that. All right. So that's what I'm going to finish with today. Thank you, and we're ready for any questions if there are some.
Can someone be more than one role?
Should you use the microphone?
Hello, thank you for your presentation. I would like to ask a question. Can someone be more than one role?
Okay, so you're referring to the PAEI roles. We all have strengths and weaknesses in those different roles, right? Because we have to carry them out. We have to be able to produce client needs. We have to be able to create systems and processes for administration. We have to drive change for entrepreneurship. And we have to integrate people. And so all of us have strengths and weaknesses in those different roles. Can you change your strength or weakness? You can certainly develop your weaknesses. But I don't think you'll ever just change. Your weakness is not going to become a strength. Right? That would be like somehow changing your personality. You can certainly develop it. But how do you know whether you have a strength or a weakness? Think about the things that you do that give you energy. When you're at work, what is it you do? Right? Is it getting on the phone and talking with customers? Is that what really gets you excited and gives you more energy? And you could do that all day. Right? Or do you not like that? You have to do it, you can do it, but it really robs you of energy. It's hard to do. Right? Then it's a weakness. You can still develop it, but it's unlikely that it's ever going to become something that you love to do. Right? So that would be one example. So you can certainly develop your roles. Whether you can switch or not is another story. I'll give you another example of these roles and how they work. If you think about two kids playing with the same toy, right? Let's say you're a parent, you have two kids at home, you hear them in the other room, they're playing with a toy, and they start fighting over the toy. Now, somebody that had a strength in this P role, which is to create more value, how would they solve this problem? To create more value, they'd get a second toy. So now each kid has one to play with, right? They've satisfied the needs of both kids. If you're somebody that's strong in that A role, what you might do is create a system of sharing. One kid gets 5 minutes, the other kid gets 5 minutes. Right? And then if you're a person that's strong in that E role, which is about change and doing things differently, you might just say, put that toy away, let's go to the movies. Let's go to the park and play. And if you're a person that has a strength in the I role, your approach might be, okay, you guys, you got to learn how to share, you got to work together and figure this out. Right? And that will predominantly be our decision-making style all the time, especially when we're under pressure and short of time. Okay? And so what this actually means is that because we need all four roles, and if we only have strengths in one or two roles, that means that we need other people with us. Right? Other people that can bring different viewpoints, bring in those other strengths. But then that means conflict. So we have to be able to manage that conflict. Did I answer your question? Good. Okay. Anything else? Any questions online? No? Okay then. I'll finish up. Thank you very much. And I hope you found today useful.